in critical states like Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and North Carolina. A state, by the way, that'll begin sending out absentee ballots a week from tomorrow. So it is ready or not, Election Day, here we come. And that is where we start today with NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memley, who's in Savannah, Georgia, at the site of tonight's rally. Here with me at the table, Democratic strategist and professor at Columbia University and MSNBC political analyst Basil Smikle, and the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network. It has been quite the 24 hours, Mike Memley. I'll start with you. You have been there in Savannah at this event where the vice president is expected to speak. If her schedule holds, as I mentioned, we're going to be hearing from her before this program is over. But preview for us the message she is making in Savannah to those voters.
Well, I mean, you get a sense of the general message of the Harris campaign here in Georgia by looking over my left shoulder. You see the banner that says "A New Way Forward." The vice president may be the sitting vice president, but she is absolutely running as a change agent here. And it's so interesting because when she does get on stage, the Harris campaign saying she is going to lay out very clearly what voters have to choose between in this election, what she is going to call the dark and dangerous vision of Project 2025, the governing blueprint for former President Donald Trump, and her patriotic, optimistic vision that she says she's going to be putting before the American people. She's offering some more policy specifics as she does so. It was a week ago she gave sort of an overarching view in Chicago at the Democratic Convention of the way she would take this country forward. But just as she's continuing her bus tour leading up to this rally here tonight, she told some voters, some small business owners, in fact, that she's going to be laying out a new small tax credit for startup companies next week. So this is all her parting to put some of the economic specifics on the table, as she is very late to the party here as the Democratic nominee. Obviously a late shift, but you also can feel the energy, the momentum with this very large venue. This arena seats 9,000. Not every seat is full, but it's still about an hour before the vice president arrives. People are still making their way in. The bus tour that she's been on with Governor Wallace has been really about trying to show the momentum that the Harris campaign feels that they have in this campaign. When President Biden was leading the ticket, they were increasingly narrowing their focus to those blue wall states where they are playing defense. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, states that Biden won 4 years ago and absolutely had no path to victory unless he won again. Harris starting here in Georgia, not just a place that only recently joined the battleground map, but a part of Georgia that hasn't seen Democrats campaign here for the presidency since 1992. So that's what the Harris campaign is putting forward. Of course, the big headlines that may come out of the day, though, may be from that CNN interview. When you don't do a lot of interviews, Eamon, that raises the stakes. It puts an extra spotlight on those that you do. And certainly we're all looking forward to hearing what she has to say in that conversation with Sina Zainab-Ash.
Yeah, and we'll certainly bring that to our viewers as soon as we get any sound from that. But, Mike, I got to ask you about the enthusiasm here for a moment. And we mentioned that new polling numbers that Harris campaign will be happy to see, undoubtedly. What now? I mean, this Georgia trip was a big one. They've captured a lot of this momentum coming out of the convention. Any indication what their strategy will be, where they go with the limited amount of time that they have left because of the fact that she entered the race a little bit late?
Well, yeah, the campaign does feel that it has this momentum, and so that it can continue to press the envelope a little bit. Governor Walz leaving Georgia here now to go to North Carolina, a state that Donald Trump won 4 years ago, where the Harris campaign and the Biden campaign before it always felt good about the chances of maybe flipping that map. You even have the Harris campaign going on the airwaves in the state of Florida this week. Now, it was a very targeted campaign advertising buy in the Palm Beach media market. We know that former President Trump lives there, and they were probably trying to send a message to him directly. But there have been even these conversations among the Harris team about if this polling swing continues, if they get even more of a bounce out of the convention, that maybe that's a state that they can maybe put into play, force the Trump campaign to have to continue to spend resources where it shouldn't have, or at least it doesn't think it should have. And so consider this, Eamon. 4 years ago, yes, we were in the middle of a public health emergency, COVID crisis, but President Biden only made one trip to the state of Georgia. Vice President Harris, his running mate then at the time, made two separate trips here. Vice President Harris has already been to this state 7 times this year, and the campaign is indicating that she'll still find time here very often in the remaining 69 days of this campaign.
Yeah, as you suggested, a state that is now fully in play for her and her campaign. Mike Memoli, thank you very much for starting us off. And almost on cue, as we mentioned, we now have that first clip from the interview that the Vice President Kamala Harris has given to CNN's Dana Bash. I'm going to play that for you. We'll get the reaction on the back end of it. This is her talking about her policy positions.
How should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy? Is it because you have more experience now and you've learned more about the information? Is it because you were running for president in a Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act. We have set goals for the United States of America and, by extension, the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as an example. That value has not changed. My value around what we need to do to secure our border, that value has not changed. I spent 2 terms as the Attorney General of California prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, violations of American laws regarding the illegal passage of guns, drugs, and human beings across our border. My values have not changed.
My values have not changed. A powerful answer there from the Vice President. Baz, I'll get your thoughts on that, because that was something that we knew probably was going to be brought up, this questioning of potential change in policy, and a very powerful response that while you may change a solution to a problem, the value on issues like climate being a real threat, like immigration being a serious issue that needs to be tackled, has not changed.
Yeah, no, and let's get one thing out the way, too, because there are a lot of critics who have said, well, it was taking her too long to do this interview and so on, and why is she doing it with her vice president? Guess what? George W. Bush did an interview with his vice president. Donald Trump did an interview with his vice president. Kamala Harris is an extraordinarily accomplished leader. She can do an interview. So I'm glad that she's done it. I think the answer is powerful, because even if she is not terribly specific on the details, you should always, always address the larger values that are at play here, because then you can actually talk to people, you can fill in the gaps and the blanks with those values down the road, with the details as well. And so it is, I think, imperative for the campaign to kind of continue to push values, because as people get to know her, that's what they're going to want to understand. Yes, the policy details are important, but can I trust you?
Yeah.
Do you share the kinds of ideas and values that I share as a voter? And the more she can communicate that, the more I think voters will feel more confident in her leadership.
It's a stark contrast, because, as I said, it's a sign of a pragmatic politician, somebody who knows that things are changing. We're learning more about climate change. We're learning more about new solutions. There's no technology on how to deal with the border. Pragmatism suggests that you know how to address these issues with the core value being the same, as opposed to just completely pivoting and changing 180 degrees to something unfounded.
And we also gain confidence when you have someone that deals with their values being firm, but that will respond in time, in the time that you're dealing, which may be different than it was 3 years before. So I think the naivety of some that question that she may have changed on some things. They're comparing something that may have been 4 years ago with something that was 4 years later. The situation changed.
Right.
And I think that that is why it was so powerful for her to say, my values haven't changed. The same values I said that in 2019 is what I'm saying in 2022, but I'm reacting to a different set of circumstances. And I think that that just eliminates that. And I think the political side of that is powerful, is she's running against people that have no values. Right. If you remember,
and who change depending on every day of the week.
180 degrees.
Right.
You're running against a guy, J.D. Vance, who called Donald Trump a man like Hitler, and said how he was of no consequence, no moral values and all. Now he's running as his vice president or to be president of the United States. So you're going to talk about a timetable with climate change and talk about a man who's talking about the same guy in the same politics, 180 degrees.
Not to mention a president who, ran on overturning Roe versus Wade, drew a sense of pride from it, and then once he overturned it, realized that it's bad for him politically. Now he's trying to distance himself from that disastrous decision. Let me get your thoughts on the polling, because this is important here for a moment. When we look at the polling, 5 weeks ago, this was unthinkable, this new map that has emerged for the vice president and her campaign. 5 and 6 point deficits in some of these races, also nationally, erased overnight. Completely different landscape. How does the campaign sustain that momentum?
Well, some of it's built in part because before Kamala Harris was at the top of the ticket, it was Joe Biden. It was a very different campaign, to Rev's point earlier. Circumstances were very different. Joe Biden was saying, let's keep the ship running in the right direction. This is now a change campaign, as Mike alluded to earlier. She's a change candidate and a change campaign. And I think as a result of that, people's motivations are different. People's enthusiasm is very different because they know through Kamala Harris, this country can go in a different direction than what Donald Trump is proposing. So having said that, it goes back to the point from before. She had been going out into these communities and making these trips beforehand. The fact that she's doing it now, again, at the top of the ticket and going into areas that Democrats may not have been as great going into before, but making sure that they're contesting everywhere. I will say, Georgia specifically, I know that Stacey Abrams did a lot when she was running for governor to go into some of these rural communities, talked a lot to black farmers, for example, and make sure that they're included in these conversations. But I think if we see that strategy across more of America, as they have been doing, more people get to know her, and the more they know her, the more they trust her, and that is what we're seeing reflected in the numbers right now.
So, Rev, you probably are more familiar with that part of Georgia. What is the message that she should take to rural parts of Georgia that are perhaps traditionally more redder than the areas where previous campaigns, I mean, Biden went down to Georgia in 2020, focusing mostly on the metro Atlanta area. You also had the important the Senate races there, which obviously adds momentum to the race. They don't have that this time, so she has to come with a different message.
I think she's got to talk about things that they're concerned about in terms of the cost of farming, those that are still dealing with that kind of economy, the cost of how they deal with travel there. You know, when you're in rural areas, you're not talking about mass transit. So gasoline prices mean a lot different there. And I think she can address that. I know those areas because of the Ahmaud Arbery case, which happened in Brunswick. We kind of stayed there for a while. The other thing you have to keep in mind in terms of her addressing these rural counties in Georgia is she addressed rural counties in California. She ran twice and won for the Attorney General of the state of California and for the U.S. Senate. So it's not like, people think California, they think Hollywood, Los Angeles, San Francisco. In between there, you might be in a place like Georgia. And she ran in all of them and got elected each time.
I'll add to that because even if you go to upstate New York, it looks a lot like some of these parts of the country. There are at least 30 counties in the state of New York that consider themselves rural. And when I was up there as executive director of the party, just going and talking to those farmers, when they're giving out squash at the end of events to their neighbors, you're like, why are you